And the number they put on the LOI, did they offer you the 5 that you were expecting? So you had 5 plus a consulting agreement that would have you do various tasks. It sounds like there's a story here because it took 3 months. So what was the next 3 months like?
Well, this story isn't as interesting, but there is a story. I mean, it was essentially just a really drawn out due diligence process. Partly because this was one of the first acquisitions, so they didn't have in-house staff that had specialized in these, so they brought a bunch of attorneys from outside the company to do the deal. And they were like, maybe had different priorities in terms of pushing it done than in-house did. So part of it was also my fault that I wasn't ready for this. I didn't have anything ready. And for example, they asked, okay, first thing we need, like I had mentioned, all the contractors you ever worked with. And I was like, that's going to be impossible. I've been running this business for 9 years. I'm an Upwork junkie. I'm on there all day long. I've hired random people to do one thing, to create like a thumbnail once. How am I going to find that person and get them, not only list, but get them to sign like a waiver that says, you're not liable for blah, blah, blah. So the contractor list in Excel was like 150 people. And I had to message every single one of them, including people that burned me. There were a couple of people that I paid an advance to that ghosted me, and I still had to swallow my pride and email them and say, will you sign this thing? And one of them did. I came out of the woodwork and did. So, and I wasn't ready with like numbers and anything they needed. So everything they asked me for, it took me a little bit longer than it could have because I wasn't ready to sell. If I was going on like one of these platforms where you can sell your business, I would have all my ducks in a row because I would have been ready. I wasn't ready. But it was also, the due diligence was really extensive because they're publicly traded. So they have to, and acquisition is one of those things that you can have like shareholder lawsuits and liability. But they were most concerned with contractors. They were really worried someone's going to come out of the woodwork and say, hey, Brian hired me to do this thing and I wrote this thing for the site and now I should own that. That's my IP. And they were afraid people were going to come out and say, I worked on this design and, I didn't have proper contract that said Backlinko owns it, I own that IP. Now, fortunately, by using platforms like Upwork and 99 Designs, you're automatically protected with that stuff. This is something I learned from this process because in the contract it says whatever they deliver, you own. But if you just hire people off the street and you don't have that agreement in place, they could potentially say, look, I made that for him, but I still own it. So now when we hire contractors, we make sure to have this standard form that basically says, anything created during this time for the business is owned by the business. But it was a lot of like phone calls and legal stuff. Now, fortunately, I found a lawyer on Upwork that was amazing, that helped me through the process. And I remember the first call we had with the lawyer when I got back from this trip, we're going to have our legal team, which is like a bunch of ninja lawyers at this public company, and you should bring your attorney. So I hired this guy on Upwork. I have no idea if he's even going to show up. So I'm on this call, petrified that I'm going to be like, here's me with my lawyer. Fortunately, he showed up and he was like a pit bull in the first call. He was like, this thing, you need to change this, you need to change that. He was like super aggressive. I'm glad he had my back, but he was a little adversarial. So after the call, I was like, Jeff, chill out, man. Like, this deal's pretty much done. We don't need to, this isn't like a lawsuit. We're on the same side here. So once he realized that, then he was great because he has tons of experience with M&A. And that's why he was so aggressive, because he realized I was outgunned. And he didn't want something in the deal, especially non-compete wise, to come back to bite me down the road. So he ended up being like the MVP of this whole process because he helped me navigate it all. And also I would have signed something that would have been, maybe detrimental in the future for me. And he helped me avoid those roadblocks.
What was the biggest thing he helped you avoid? Like, I'm sure there were dozens of examples of things, but if you could put your finger on one landmine you almost stepped on and he showed you how to avoid that landmine, what was it?
The number one was liability. So in the agreement, it had something, maybe this was the contractor agreement that was tied to the deal, I don't remember, but it was essentially, if I did something bad, I'd be liable for that. So with a public company, the potential damage is huge, right? So if I said something or did something that, cost millions, I could be liable for that amount of money. And it's silly because I'm an independent contractor for like 20 hours a week. What could I possibly do to damage the company that much? So he was able to remove that. Now, it's one of those things where it's like very unlikely that this would ever come up. But it's just good not to have it in there. That's just bad business to have something in there that this sort of Damocles hanging over your head, that if you make a mistake, say for example, I'm sending an email to this email list that they bought. They're like, Brian, send an email. And I, put something wrong in there and it causes a bunch of chaos. Like, instead of just being like, Brian, you're fired, it could be you're also liable for all this damage and we're going to determine it and all this stuff. So that was the number one thing, because when I was in this situation and the deal was in front of me, I was just grabbing the pen. I just wanted to sign it. And he was like, whoa, we got time to go through and make sure everything's good before we do that.
Yeah. Well, it's great to have a great lawyer in your back pocket, because there's a lot of stuff that needs to get done the right way, for sure.